Today we're going to interview artist Jay Taylor, who is a visual artist whose works investigate the mindsets within urban environments sectioned by classism. Taylor's free-flowing style authorizes him to deliver a visual language of storytelling through various mediums, but most commonly through a combination of paint, photography, film, and music. References of American history through the experience of Black and brown people can be found in his work, along with iconography of popular culture. Taylor's work is versatile. On the one end of the spectrum, his works painted in tones of gray dismiss color and environmental aesthetic, references as an effort to force us to deal with the solitude of each subject matter and the stylistic characteristics of his portraiture. The lack of visual complexity combined with techniques of pattern interruption politely escort us to the conceptual complexity, whether pleasant or disturbing. On the other end of the spectrum, his works painted in rich, colorful hues embrace the diversity of culture and transcribe gathered emotion onto the canvas in an effort to share a sense of authenticity, style, and design. So I look forward to talking about that with you later on.
Thank you.
A lot of really interesting concepts in those statements.
Right.
So the other thing I wanted to do is thank you for your interest in taking part of our school's mission, which is to provide engaging, informative, and current programming here, particularly in the art department and also especially in the Cliff Gallery. Your exhibition, this interview, and hopefully the ongoing online dialogue enliven the much needed discussion around the topic of art. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So let's get some context here. Mm-hmm. I'd like for you to talk about how you secured an exhibition here at the Cliff Gallery. How did that come about?
Well, it's been in the making for over a year or so now. It was just some wonderful art people that experienced a exhibit of mine like maybe a year and a half ago, and they really were impressed with just the arrangement of the paintings, the message behind the paintings, and the young lady that was actually managing this gallery at the time heard about it and wanted to also bring it here. So as time has gone on, the work has continued to progress, and we've kind of come up with this beautiful display here of work, and I'm working with you on that. So sure. That's pretty much how it happened. I mean, it's how everything kind of happens, right?
Yeah, of course.
It's the word of mouth is so fantastic, and to be able to be introduced to the gallery here, the Cliff Gallery, it was just a perfect marriage for something a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, than what they initially saw then. Yeah, so this collaboration or just all of these works together, it kind of is better suited for a institution environment, more abstract thoughts, and something that can be so boxed in, right? When you talk about students and learning and different situations like that, to be able to bring something that is a little bit more abstract, especially with the art department, it's like, it was a great opportunity to show something like this. So that's how it kind of happened.
So you just addressed my next question was, okay, why did you say yes? Is there something that was really special?
That's a great question. I said yes to this even more so now than when it was initially proposed to me, because once you learn about Mountain View College and you learn about what takes place at the Cliff Gallery, it's all about educating the students, and bringing something new to the table to also give them the ability to see different artists' works, One of the ways that I find inspiration is also watching other artists, right? Artists of now, artists of the past, And so to be able to contribute to that and that mission was perfect. It was just a direction that I've always wanted to go, and this was really a great opportunity to kind of share what I've been working on for a few years now with some young minds, a lot more young minds, to get a better understanding of how they would perceive some of these things that I'm addressing. So it was fantastic. It's a no-brainer, you know.
I love that because as a visual artist myself, I feel the same way, and so it fulfills some goals that I have as well as a gallery manager here, and I relate to a lot of what you said.
That's right.
I'm also an educator, so it's the same kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah, and those conversations that we've had early on, you've really expressed that. So it was easy. It seemed like it was very easy to put this together because we were on the same frequency from the beginning.
I noticed that, and this is the first type of work that I've done in an institution like this on my own.
Right.
I was under the tutelage of some other art gallery directors.
Right.
And to be able to handle this on my own, I've learned a lot from working with you. You're very, very easy to work with.
That's right.
Very smart.
Well, thank you.
All those kinds of things.
Thank you
It
very
was a
much.
no-brainer for me too. Yeah. So, talking about exhibiting, can you visit why you want or you need or you desire to exhibit your work? And, you know, what is your drive? What is your purpose? How does it fulfill you? Talk about that a bit.
Well, I mean, that's something that I'd say, you know, various artists might have issues with, is creating and then also being vulnerable enough to, you know, or allowing yourself to be in that vulnerable state to actually show what you're actually creating. I take a position of concept. I like to develop the concept first, right? And there's more or less a purpose behind the work from the beginning, you know, which is almost like the jump start of the creative process before I even start to physically create. So each one of these pieces, and typically almost every piece that I create, is something that was meant to be shown. You know, it's not that I create for myself. It's never that. Once it's complete or I just walk away from it, it's fair game. It's up for, you know, the ability for other people to come in and kind of, you know, soak it up. And it helps me also with getting feedback from works that I create to kind of continue to evolve as an artist. There is no right or wrong answer to it, but I really do depend on the responses from people that view my work to kind of help me, you know, move into the next direction in this organic space that I create in. So it's almost essential. It's a part of the process, you know. There's a few things every now and then that I might create that are more or less for me or my family, right? But that's something that even still has such a heavy conceptual basis to it that it can also be shown in any public display. So yeah, it's just something that I've always thought was a part of the process. I never want to create something that only I can see.
Yeah, that seems to be really a typical perspective and experience that most visual artists have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I relate to that.
Right.
Also. So, curious to know. I love to hear artist story. Can you briefly talk about when did this artistic journey begin for you? Can you remember like your first drawing or anything like that?
Well, no, I've kind of been drawing for a long time. It's one of the first hobbies that I had as a kid, you know. So whenever I first learned how to draw, it's been a thing since then. I come from a very creative family, you know. A lot of people in my family are very creative, but a lot of musicians, you know, a lot of abstract jazz musicians, mathematical thinking people, really sharp, really quick. And I also had a natural ability to play different instruments, you know, and my daughter does as well at 6, so she's really good. But I kind of just channeled that creative energy into the drawing. And so I would start drawing things that I would see. I was doing still lifes and things like that really young. And in my household, it was just something that I did. Nobody really knew what drawing or art really was. So we just kind of, I was just a kid that liked to draw. And family would come over all the time during the holidays and things like that. And they would just say, oh, there he is again. He's just drawing. And I would just hand out the drawings that I do, hang them up, on the fridge and things like that, let people take them. And I started getting better and better and better, and started taking, a little art class here or there whenever it was offered, and kind of just, messed around with it here and there. But when I realized that I actually had a talent is when I got into sports. That was around junior high school. When I started playing sports, I put down the drawing pad. Like I didn't touch it for years. And every now and then I would get an itch to do something. I'd pick it up and I would start drawing again. But I realized I was way better than I was a few years ago, right? Without any practice. So it was all a mental thing. It was a mental thing. I could see it first and I could execute it, right? So I started drawing people. Then I started drawing myself in mirrors, right? And doing these self-portraits and these cartoon characters. And then I started getting into these comic book type of things and really exercising the skill of detail and scale and all of those type of things. And ever since then, I've just kind of, been doing it, but as a hobby.
So interesting. So I have to go off track my list because I'm very fascinated. I'm trying to remember to go back to what you said. So the first thing you said that I found really fascinating was you got better and better and better. And so that was great.
That wasn't great.
I'm so glad. It's water.
I know.
Maybe in there.
Make sure you keep this.
Yeah, it's in the cabinet. There's some paper towels.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you said you got better and better and better. I'm curious to know. I have a real weird relationship with the word better because it's been used almost like to discipline me as a child. So better I don't like, but it is a good word. So how did you evaluate yourself on how you got better?
Well, I would say that, right, the idea of being able to create something, almost mimic something, right? Thank you so much. To mimic something. So to copy.
Okay.
Right? To copy it. So just say for instance, you're trying to make a photocopy of something on the copy machine and it's low on ink. So you're like, that's not very good. It's not as clear as I would like it to be. Try it again. I need a better copy. Yeah. That's essentially how better plays into this equation, right? Oh, just here, you can bring it up closer. That's how that plays into this type of scenario. So, thank you.
So what you're saying is, from what I remember you said, I guess you were drawing things. You were drawing people and things you saw. So you saw yourself render those drawings of the objects and animals and people.
Objects, people.
More lifelike.
Yeah.
More realistic.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so as I was able to create a better copy of it, I realized that I actually had more talent than I thought,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Thank you so much. And that's basically how I started to evolve, and realize I had some sort of artistic ability. Yeah.
It makes me think of, so basically, long story short, I've heard people just be so enamored at Picasso's more contemporary work.
Yeah.
Very abstracted, not very realistic. But so a lot of people think, oh, well, that's the best way to paint, or that's the best way to draw. But the reality is, he didn't get there from starting there. He got there from being able to render something that he saw with his eyes on a piece of paper.
That's right.
So I'm understanding what you're talking about for yourself in the same light. That makes
That's
sense
right.
to me.
The more that I go as an artist, I realize that I'm doing essentially the same thing I've been doing since I was a kid,
Yeah.
you know? And what I have, I guess, started doing without knowing it was manipulating these things, right? Where I'm now applying these concepts and ideas and these thoughts to these people, these animals, these objects, to give them an entirely different personality, right? So now I've come to a point where I've copied so much growing up to learn how to create something with some sort of aesthetic, you know. It's like now I don't even want it to be exact, you know, but I've developed a skill set and a style that allows me to actually manipulate it.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
but we're to a point where you still can connect to what it originally was, you know. So it takes a long time to get to. I mean, it's taken me all my life to get to that point.
Of course.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So I relate to that in terms of language, especially. So there's several languages that I've learned, but there's only a couple that I've learned really well,
Right.
where I can understand how to joke in that language,
Right.
things like that.
That's right.
Otherwise, you can't manipulate
That's right.
it to where it makes any
And
sense
those
whatsoever.
are things you pick up on the way.
And it takes time.
Right.
Exactly.
There's a lot of unwritten rules
Right.
that you learn with the experience.
Exactly
Right.
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 The other thing you said that I found really fascinating, and somebody might be surprised by, but I really understand it and relate to it, and that is you began to realize what a good artist you were and how much you liked it when you weren't doing it
That's right.
while you were playing sports.
That's right.
And then you would come back to it ever so often. So I find that really fascinating. What is it about that you feel like gave you this clarity about who you
Well,
were?
I'd say that it's the elements of nature that kind of allow me to find that clarity. I do the same thing till this day. When I'm creating, the last thing I want it to feel like is work. I just don't, you know. I won't approach something if I feel like I'm going to mess it up or if I'm not really vibing with it. So I really don't give myself an opportunity to mess up on a painting, right? If I'm not feeling it, I'm not doing it. And when I was younger and I would put down the art pads and the paints and let a couple years go by and pick them back up, it was a real inspiration that brought me back to it, you know? And now I found different ways of giving myself that escape, you know, that break, that buffer between each painting that I create. So for instance, I can work on a piece now, and once I finish that piece, I have to completely clean my studio up and get it all the way back set up, almost sometimes rearrange it before I start the next one, because I never want to bring that old energy into a new piece. And in the midst of that, if I have the time to give myself a little bit of breathing room, I'll spend time in nature, you know, and I'll just kind of reset. And so I really don't have a whole lot of time, you know, because almost every ounce of my time is allotted to something that essentially leads back to my performance as an artist, you know. So it's just these things that I would do naturally as a kid that I've now kind of been able to, you know, when you learn more about yourself, you're able to structure things around you based on how you actually are. But you got to take some time to analyze yourself, which is another vulnerable thing to do, right? To be able to criticize yourself, analyze yourself, look at yourself in the mirror and say, these are the things that I've done right, these are the things that I've done wrong, these are the things I can do better, you know, and give yourself the opportunity to really create without someone else telling you this is how it's supposed to be done or not. You just have to go for it, but you can only do that if you kind of start with the clean a clean slate
So
every time.
this is super interesting for me because, wow, I had a train of thought, and then
Yeah.
because of what you said, it helps me understand why I think we connected, because I do the exact same
Same
thing.
thing, right.
Not every artist is that way. My
No,
husband's not even that
I
way.
work very differently.
And so what I relate to is the need, it's the brain space. So
Absolutely.
the studio space is almost functioning in a way as our brain space.
Yes.
And so
That's
for
right.
you and for other artists and for me, that it's necessary to clear that brain space.
That's right.
So that we can start fresh and start new. And
That's
for me
right.
too, and I think it's because of the way I was raised, nature is really important to kind of reset me. So
It
I
is.
understand why we had a kind of a connection. That
That's
makes
right.
sense.
Yeah.
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 So let's see. Based on what you said, I think it'd be, what I'm curious about is, number one, the paintings that you chose to display in this particular exhibition right now. So can you talk about why these paintings are here, and even just the way that they are installed in this space?
Right. Well, it's kind of something that it wasn't really planned. You know, it wasn't a set show or a large series of works that you can just say these are all created under the same inspiration and here's my show. These are all mixed up, you know, ideas and thoughts that essentially all deal with the concept of finding balance, right? And so, of course, the show being called Level allows me to explore that and bring up a lot of questions. So I went just through some of the things that I've painted, some of the things that I was working on now, and was able to, you know, kind of pick and pull and put together something that was going to be interesting enough, thought-provoking enough, you know, and kind of raising a lot of questions that deal with balance, you know. And so these were the pieces that I've chosen, and it kind of worked out right. It's like they're all displayed in kind of a timeline, you know, and I couldn't have planned that, you know. So sometimes you just got to step back and allow the universe to universe a bit, and it just seemed to work out. I'm not going to say perfect, but very well.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you, in fact, I mean, I understand it as an installation artist. You show up to the space.
Yes.
And you have your materials, and then you respond to that.
That's right.
With your concept in mind.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's right.
So thinking about that, the word successful, I think is important. It's relevant in our
Yes.
careers. So how do you feel about the exhibit? Is it successful to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it was successful before we even hung the art.
I like that.
Yeah, it was already there. You know, when you go into a space and you get a vibe of the space, it does have an impact on what you've created. And the idea of level came, of course, you know, just by looking at all of the different works and what they actually mean, but also the space lended itself well to level because it's a very balanced space. You know, it didn't only allow me to show canvas works, it also allowed me to show film works, you know. So you get an opportunity to address a lot of the same concepts through different mediums. And that is a great way to balance out a show, you know. And it's still going to be a success after we take the art down, you know, because everything that's been archived, everything that's been shared in social media, this talk, this that we're doing now, this conversation is something that people can always go back to and get a good understanding of why we do this, you know, in the first place. It's never about me, you know, never about me. So when I'm able to pull in this type of work and show it, especially amongst educators and students, and, you know, get great sound feedback from peers and other people that are in the arts and artists, it just is very helpful. So it's definitely a success, a huge one, huge success.
You said it's never about you, and I know that the reputation that artists, I'd say the spirit reputation of artists is that we're narcissistic, we're very selfish, we're very self-absorbed,
Yeah.
and I think that's an old,
Yeah.
kind of dated description, but I also think people do think that.
Well,
People
I mean,
do think we're very
sometimes people are that, you know, especially in the technological world that we live in now, and in the social media phase of things. It is all about your 15 minutes of fame. It is all about me, I. You know, you have to make a conscious effort, strong effort not to do that, you know. One of my most most used taglines and hashtags is "it's all about the art." You know, I always lead with that because I want people to understand that this is not something that I'm doing to plaster my face in front of you. It's definitely my creations, it's definitely my brand, but the art itself is for everybody, right? And so I try to find the best way to bring that to the table, to the forefront. And it's been very successful in that sense because people can view the art, have an opinion about the art, right? And they don't feel like they're under a microscope or someone's judging them based on their perspective or their perception. I mean, this art is here to provoke question and to also test and challenge your perception, you know? So like I said before I even start to physically create anything, I'm already looking at the concept and how I can actually share this publicly, you know? Yeah, once I'm done with it, I want to get it off my table.
Sure, that
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense.
right.
So a couple things that I heard you say that stand out to me are the intentionality.
Yes.
And so I think, like you said, there's an intentionality in showing up in the studio and how you do that and what that means and how that looks for you.
Absolutely.
And then also the intentionality to keep away from making yourself the center, because
That's
it
right.
is very kind of a normal thing that happens in the world today.
Right.
So I appreciate that opinion and that viewpoint.
Yeah, right.
The other thing that I failed to mention is that this is nearly 10 years, correct?
That's right.
Kind of compiled. It's not all the work that you've done,
Right.
but you kind of call it a retrospective. So
That's
in a
right.
way, that's what this body of work is here.
Absolutely.
And for me, when I see someone's work in retrospective, Philip Guston was one of the first ones whose work I saw at the Fort Worth Modern. It made such a difference, because when I just see one painting, I have a certain kind of feeling and sense, and that's fine.
Right.
But then to see a retrospective of an artist's work, at least for me as an artist, and I think it could do this for a number of people, it gives them, like you said, a perspective, a different perspective.
That's right.
And you had intentionality in the perspective on some level that you were relaying here, but also giving the freedom for the viewer to respond, because your
That's right.
intentionality is asking questions.
That's right.
Which I think is one of the main tenets in being an artist.
That's
is
right.
helping people see the questions that are out there.
I
right?
couldn't have explained that any better.
You already
That
did.
was fantastic.
You already did. Let's see. Okay, let's do this. I'm curious to know about. Okay, I'm a sculptor. I don't paint. I
Right.
love paint. I love the viscosity of paint. I love house paint, but I'm not a painter. So why
right.
painting? Why video? Why those
Very
mediums?
good, very good question. Well, you know, you kind of start with what you got, you know, and when I really started selling my work professionally, it was something that kind of forced me to use what I had, right? It was pulling out some old paints, you know, really oils and acrylics. There was a piece of wood laying in the garage, just a raw piece of plywood, right? And it wasn't even cut symmetric or anything. And I just primed it and started using those paints on it. And the tools that I had, you know, there was very little material. And I didn't have barely any money, you know, but I felt that I needed to just kind of work my way through this painting. Maybe something would be revealed, right? And when I finished this piece, I entitled it Execute. And the piece itself turned out really beautiful painting, an abstract painting. And someone saw the painting, you know, and asked how much the painting would cost. And I'm like, that's not for sale, but this piece is on your wall. It's beautiful. This is amazing. We know you're an artist, but how does this work? And I'm like, I don't know. If you want it, just make me an offer. Yeah. And it made me an offer. And I was like, you would really pay that much for my painting?
Yeah.
Right? And so I kind of learned how to use what I had to create. And I realized that that was enough, you know. And still, till this day, I use very minimal supplies to create. I think that the power behind what you're making definitely comes from the idea, the initial thought and idea. And if you can learn how to execute something with all those fancy bells and whistles, then it's way more gratifying and rewarding at the end. And that's why I fell in love with painting and paint, you know. And I love sculpture, I love metal, I love wood, I love ceramics. I've played around with all of those things, photography, film, a lot of different mediums. But I'm one of those people that really believes that if your peers don't give you access to that, if they don't say essentially, okay, JT, you are a photographer, you know, I've seen you work on this, you've had much discipline in this, or you're a sculptor, then I don't think that I should call myself that, you know. So I'll never take on a title that I haven't earned from my peers. And so I'm a painter, right? I'm a painter. I've have several friends that are in filmmaking that love my short films, and they've done lots of big projects, lots of films, and in confidence, in a conversation kind of like this, JT, you're a filmmaker. Like, okay, you know, I understand now because I've done so many different little films, but I didn't go to film school, you know. I didn't go to film school, but no, I do make films, you know. And that's kind of one of my jokes is like, I'm a painter. Oh, and oh yeah, I make films, you know. But I just respect the disciplines too much to call myself something that my peers haven't really blessed me with, you know.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and I understand it, really relate to it. To me, I'm almost evaluating you as a conceptual artist because the way you're speaking, it's like that particular idea needed to be video.
Yes,
so
it had to be.
So that idea tells you what form you might be using.
Right.
And one of the things, you have confidence here as well in the paintings. So these ideas make sense that they would be paintings as well.
That's right.
So I get that.
Yes.
So I do want to look at some specific works, and I know you've done this before,
It's okay.
but if you don't mind, I'd like to look at, I can choose one, but if you'd like to choose a painting and talk about it.
Yeah. Which would you like to
talk
talk
about? We've talked
about?
about this one so much, and I think it'd be really important to talk about that work.
Right.
Just because of how strong it is conceptually.
Right. Well, I mean, this piece is called What Sets You Claim. And this piece is, I mean, it's very attractive in the sense that it catches your eye. Of course, it's subjective, you know. You have all of these things going on in this painting that kind of correlate to the things that we see in the media, popular culture, things of the past, things of the present. And it's almost like the futurist in me, you know, when I created this painting some years ago, it's like predicting some of the things that could possibly happen based on the things that are happening and taking place at that particular moment. So when you look at this piece and the balance of this piece, from what happens on the LA streets, with the difference in gangs versus what happens in politics and the difference in political parties and colors, reds and blues and things like that. You start to find this parallel, and you start to see how one thing could actually trigger another thing, And I created a self-portrait with this. I felt that it was necessary for me to be the subject in this piece because the script that goes in the back of this painting, it just says, stop killing yourself over and over and over and over again. So it's posing a question as to what that actually means with stop killing yourself and how the figure in the front driving this car is navigating something that you might actually have control over. So it's questioning the amount of control that each subject has when they're all in the same vessel going the same direction, because that never really happens. You never see that put in the same situation. So that's why the piece is what it is. And I think why it has so much, gets so much attention, because it can be looked at as something controversial, but it's actually put there to expand the mind so that people can understand how to, it's almost like look at this from a different perspective, Yeah, and challenge the perception. Because if you see any one of these figures without the others, it would mean something entirely different. But there's a story there,
So
Yeah.
one of the words we use in art is the juxtaposition.
That's right.
A lot of people don't like that word anymore, but it's a really
It's a great
important
word.
It's great, and
Right.
that's what's happening here, the
That's right.
juxtaposition of each of the characters and the characters to
That's
the
right.
background.
Absolutely.
Would you mind talking about the story about the people who delivered the mattress to your house?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, yeah, me and my wife needed to get new mattresses. And so when the delivery guys came over to bring the mattresses in, this piece was hanging in the office, which was towards the front of our place. And it's just hanging on the wall. And these guys are bringing the mattresses in. And one of the delivery guys stopped and just was staring at it. And he got a little emotional about the expression. And as we talked about it, he told me that this resonated with him in so many levels because he was in the military. And essentially what I'm showing in this piece that pretty much happens here in the country also happens in the military. And that was really interesting for me because I was thinking, well, the idea of recruiting people to serve their country, right? In this piece, it looks like he's recruiting people to kill themselves. That's the juxtaposition there. And so when he made the connection this way, it's like he's had these different experiences. And I almost had to question the authenticity of what he was saying because it didn't sound right. But as an artist, I had to think about the duality.
Right.
There's always a duality to everything. And, his personal experience and what he was describing, which he didn't want to speak on a lot, let me know how powerful this piece actually was. And I'd never shown it publicly. I think at the time I just kind of finished it, But for him to have such a strong reaction to this, both of them, actually, both of them, But when you've been in the military and you've been in the war and things like that, you can't tell. Nobody can tell you what that's like unless you've experienced that. So I just I knew that something was special about this painting, and it actually had more meaning than I knew, which is what I depend on the viewers to actually provide so that I can continue to navigate in this organic space.
Really just so grateful that that came up in the conversation because that is
You're right.
a huge thing about being an artist.
Yeah.
And that is why we do want our work to go out.
That's
why
right.
we put our work out
That's
there.
right.
It is dealing with these questions. And also, though, I know there is some artwork that I think can truly be labeled more like propaganda.
Yeah, for sure.
Very direct. It's very short-sighted.
Right.
And very, very intended perspective. And some people say that's not even art. I don't say that. I think it's okay to say that.
Right.
I mean, they can say what's art if they want to.
True.
But there is a difference in stating a statement, very clear, very short, and also opening up a question and a dialogue.
And that's what I try to do with every piece. I'm never given an answer in my art pieces. They only bring out lots and lots of questions. These things are layered, and I think that's a big difference between something that's so heavily conceptual versus something that could be more propaganda, is that you're dealing with more layers. So it's open for interpretation in many ways. You can look at this piece, what sets you claim, and you can draw so many different conclusions and questions and answers of your own from what you see based on your own personal experiences. And that's that example of these delivery men coming in and seeing this piece and their response to it was based off of past experiences.
Exactly.
Right. That I never would have thought about.
That's wonderful.
Which
Speaking
is,
of that,
I mean, exceptional. I just thought it was fantastic.
it is a real gift,
Yeah.
isn't it, to be able to have that dialogue?
Yeah.
And then we had a dialogue during your opening on Friday night, and so I think the painting that I'll choose is the painting of Jesus,
Right.
with the 3 tones of skin.
That's right.
So could you talk about that and maybe include a little bit, if you recall, I think I recall what Professor Medina was talking about, the conversation with her students as well, if that can come into it. But talk about that painting.
Well, that painting is entitled "Oh My God," and that painting is a part of a series called Color Value. So we're really dealing with color value from a technical perspective and more of a conceptual perspective, right? And taking these popular images and manipulating them to kind of propose this question of what's valuable and what's not is essentially what these things are about. So what the professor was actually leading to was, I think she had mentioned seeing other works of Jesus painted as a black man, but the features were painted of a black person or something related to Africa or whatever the case is. And we've seen lots of those images, what black Jesus would look like kind of thing. And that wasn't my mission with this particular project. I thought it would be much stronger to paint the image of Jesus the way that we see in American culture and change the hue that way to see if the difference in the color value changes your value, you know, and how you see the same aesthetic image, but with a different color. So that's what that piece is all about. And that's one of those pieces that I believe will miss, a lot of people will miss it. They'll miss it, they'll miss it, they'll miss it, which is actually not a bad thing. You know, I'm a firm believer in propelling myself into the future. I always think about how things could be, what things will be. And I would say that this piece, along with several others, might be more understood maybe 5-10 years from now. They'll get it. There's a couple of people during the opening that were like, I don't get it, you know, with several of these pieces. I don't get it. And that's a great indication that I'm on to something fantastic, you know, because not everything is meant for you, and maybe not even at that moment. But in time, it might hit you if it's supposed to, you know? Yeah.
That certainly has precedence.
Yeah.
You could probably name painter after painter
Absolutely.
after painter in the history
Well,
of
yeah.
art that people didn't get
Well, they weren't great
it.
then, but then they're great now, right? Yeah.
And didn't get what they were doing.
You just
Picasso,
have to
for
be-
one. There's
Yeah.
quite a few of them.
You have to be true to the art itself, but
Exactly.
yeah, I knew that that image of Jesus would be something that would expand the mind and really, really, because when you think about it, how many images are a part of our culture that have value, right? There's not very many really that you can think of that are kind of universal, that have that kind of value to a lot of different people from a lot of backgrounds, you know. And so these pieces here aren't the only pieces to the Color Value series. There's more, right? There's more, and they'll do the same thing that the Jesus piece would do.
Because the iconography
That's
is
right.
very universal, is
Absolutely.
what you're saying. It makes
Absolutely.
sense, yeah.
So
you
it
can
makes
focus.
sense to manipulate something like that,
Right.
to try to, you know, just have people develop further questions and also challenge the perception, you know.
You had a conversation with people online somehow, right? With the Jesus painting?
Yes.
That's interesting,
What
too.
happened with that was sometimes with social media, what I'll do is I'll share the progress of the work. So as I'm creating them, you know, I'll take shots of me creating as I'm going along. And this day, I just so happened to put out a picture of me creating this Jesus piece. But I had only worked my way through the first Jesus, right? And I was working from left to right. So they could only see this image of Jesus as a white person. You know, I guess that's what they would associate that as. And so the conversation started sparking online, and I was like, wow, I was just sharing the progress like I normally do. And after you get so many notifications, you have to kind of go back and see what's happening. And there is full dialogue of people having conversations amongst each other and arguments amongst each other about this. So you realize how strong of an image this is, right? But they started talking about things that were insinuating that Jesus was this rather than that. And, oh, we're going to have to teach him about what Jesus really is and what his real name was. And all these things that were happening and going on. And no matter where you are, where you stand in history, it's just interesting to see people actually battle about these perspectives and these perceptions and all of the above. And I thought, wow, this is so far off the mark of what this piece stands for. The piece isn't even a quarter of the way finished, and it's already complicated. By the time they see what the finished product is, I don't think that this conversation would even be relevant, you know? But it just shows you where the mind goes. So it gave me even more inspiration to continue to make this piece what it essentially came out to be. Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense, and it just goes back to putting your work out there.
Yeah.
You know, one artist might be privy to that conversation and get really angry and want to quit doing art.
No, I can't
but
do that.
instead, it is something that can really fuel what we do.
It depends on your reasons for doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a very good point.
If you're afraid of controversy or people that are being combative or whatever the case might be, those things I'm not afraid of those things, right?
Sounds like you're fueled by them.
Well, a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit more in tune with who I am as an individual, and everything that I do, especially artistically, comes from a great place, a place of peace, you know, and togetherness. So what I'm doing, sometimes the images that I'm using, the iconography that I'm using, by the time you realize how it's been manipulated, you have to like, wow, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. But no, never an intention to make someone feel bad, you know, or take a shot at anybody in that regard.
Right.
So I paint and create very freely. You know, I don't worry about, you know, where my next check is coming from. I don't allow any of those things to interfere with the creative process. So I'm okay with sharing the progress of some things, you know, and allowing
Takes
people
a lot of
to.
confidence
Oh, absolutely.
to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I know I do want to come back a little bit to your statement, but I think I might need to hone in on a little bit. So let's talk about this statement. You state that your works painted in tones of gray dismiss color and environmental aesthetic references in an effort to force us to deal with the solitude of each subject matter and the stylistic characteristics in your portraiture. Can you
Right.
talk about that a little bit?
Right. Well, what that really addresses is a lot of the works that I create are in grayscale. And that's essentially what we were going to bring to the gallery originally. And when I create in grayscale, I don't like to fill the canvas up with anything in the background, right, or in the negative space around the subject. I like to focus on the subject itself, because what I'm doing with the subject, whether it's a person or an animal or a thing, an object, it's being used in a way to push through a different characteristic. So it's almost like applying, like the animals that I paint are part of a series called Wild, right? WILD, and it stands for Watching Individuals Live Dangerously, right? And I use these wildlife animals to push out a human characteristic, right? And there are some hidden jewels in every piece. If you pay close attention to it, you would actually see it. That would make it more human than you would actually realize. And to be able to almost deliver that, I have to get rid of, just say, the jungle scenario around the animal.
Context.
That's right.
Yep.
So it may look very simple, but it's much harder to create in a grayscale format like that for me than to do any one of these
I can understand that.
pieces. Right.
Makes
Right.
a lot of sense. So the viewer is forced to kind of approach those works in a way that causes them to narrow their
That's
focus.
right. There's nothing else
Because
to
there's
grab a
no
hold
other
to.
information. Right.
There's nothing there. There are no
Interesting.
words. There are no circles. There are no fancy this, that. There are no trees. There's nothing there. There's no buildings. There's no other people. It's just this thing. It's just a
Yeah.
thing there, and you gotta kind of look for something in that one thing, and it's there, it takes a little work, right? But as an artist, I'd say that this is one of the things that I like doing when I'm creating, but it's also one of the things that could hurt me as an artist. When you talk about just an art career of doing
Risky.
something, having that one trick that you do over and over and over again, that everybody can say, oh, that's what he does, that one thing. I haven't allowed myself to do that yet. I'm still evolving. I didn't really start professionally until a little bit later, until I was 30. And that's when I said I would give myself 10 years to really grow, learn what I can do, what I can't do, and then kind of narrow it down to what this thing might be, and if I choose to do that,
Right.
Yeah, but I love to create freely. I love to exercise concepts, and sometimes you just got to do them in different ways,
Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation. I feel like that's an hour conversation
Oh,
to
absolutely.
be had at some point, because when you think about making an art career for yourself, so many different contemporary artists right now come to mind who really have a particular way that they address the work, the canvas. So it is, and they're successful at it.
Oh, yeah.
But what does that do to you if you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again? Just, I'm curious.
I'm curious too.
I
don't
can't
know.
do that. I
don't
haven't been
know.
able to do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I
all
can't
relevant.
choose that.
Yeah, it's all relevant, and that's the freedom that artists have to be able to do things like that. I imagine that when you're trying to establish a marketplace, when we're talking about the difference and differentiation between being an artist and the art business,
Right.
which are two entirely different things, right? But when you're in, and this is why a lot of times when we have these talks about art and artists, we talk about art business should be separated from the artist, so to speak, so that artists can continue to create while someone else handles art business. But it just depends on what you're in it for.
You're right.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And we have to make a living.
That's right.
really important.
Right. You know, and not all the time do are you afforded, you know, those kind of rights just because you've kind of found this one thing that you like to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult to really make it in this business, and it's kind of saturated, you know.
It is.
And but
it is.
at the same time, if you're an artist, then for me, there's some things that I must do creatively in order to actually find that balance, you know.
For yourself.
Yeah, that outlet that we talk about, it's real.
Right.
It's a real thing, you know. So I kind of yield to it. I'm very true with that. So I'm able to create freely, you know. And I do fine as an artist and financially and things like that. But I also have a very supportive family, you know, and
Which is nice.
very smart people around me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my wife is phenomenal, you know. My daughter is great, but you got to have all of those elements in place for you to be able to do something that is even worth looking at.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and
Intentionality
you're right.
and support.
Absolutely.
You're right.
It's like there's a formula there that you have to work out on your own. Everybody's
Mm-hmm.
formula is different, but depending on what your ultimate goal is, you know, if you plan accordingly, then you can have an impact in the art world.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I have a lot of other questions, but I think I'll kind of get to the end of
Sure,
it.
sure.
And that is, what have you thought about? What are your plans for the rest of, not just this year, but for the next year?
Well, we have just now entered into level 10, and I spoke a little bit about my levels at the opening. Each year is a different level for me. So I'll be creating within this year of 10, right, which I consider the new beginning. So it's more of an exploration, you know, a lot of international travel and mixing in with different art colonies and things like that here in the States and also abroad. And just allowing myself to not have a plan. It's like my plan is to not have a plan, you know, so that I can do whatever comes. Because the one thing that I'm certain of, and the one thing I know that I can do is execute. So I can create whenever I want to create. So all these years of preparation have allowed me to own that position. But the other part that's more difficult is finding the reason to create. And that's where I'm putting my focus at now. So I want to do things that are more along the lines of what we've just done here, you know, and working with educators. And who knows, I might become an educator myself. I might want to get my master's in fine art or something. Who knows? I don't know. But I do want to do something that's meaningful and worthwhile. And that's sharing my gift with other people, you know, and learning from other people. That's essentially what we're doing, you know, with this new beginning. So
Makes sense.
who knows where it's going to be?
It's exciting,
Yeah.
and it sounds like, in a way, what I relate to is clearing out the space again.
Absolutely.
It's like clearing out that space.
Push the reset button.
Push the reset,
Right.
exactly. So has your experience been pretty good here working at Mountain View, and
Oh,
would you
it's been
recommend an
fantastic.
artist working with the
I
art
have
department?
a few that I would recommend. There's been a couple of artists that expressed to me that they didn't know that this gallery was here and how beautiful this gallery is. And to have talks with your peers about what you're doing, of course, people pay attention to so many things. They don't say it all the time, but they're always watching. And for those that do want to have that conversation, to see something like this happen that is not your typical art party, you know, with all of the bells and whistles and the music and drinks flowing and all this stuff, and you get liquored up and there's paintings all on the walls with prices and, you know, all that kind of stuff. You got to really humble yourself and realize that this is a much bigger fish to fry. This is something that is directly connected to young minds and people, right, that can essentially help them evolve as artists or just people in general. You know, there's an exchange of energy there.
Right.
Yeah, it's an exchange of energy. To be able to show works and not have them for sale, for me, is that, I mean, it's like so refreshing, because it's all about the art. You can focus on the concepts, the ideas, and talk really about why this is even here, as opposed to how much you want for it.
So even though the works could sell,
Absolutely.
just the fact of that being stated,
Yeah.
that is not the
Right.
main reason why they're here,
Right.
was a draw for
Because that's
you.
not the main reason why they were created in the first place.
Yeah, interesting.
If someone's interested enough, based on my experience when I sold my first painting, right, for a few $1,000s with scrap material, I never created it for that. I was trying to push myself to a place of execution, and hopefully something would reveal itself out of that experience. And what revealed itself was someone interested enough in what I created to make me an offer.
So
But there was a lesson in that, you know?
exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're experiencing that the two entities, both a commercial gallery
Yeah.
and an educational
Right.
institution, are very valuable.
They're so valuable, both, absolutely both. And I mean, it's all relative. It just depends on what your end goal is. If you're doing something in an educational environment, or you're doing something in a gallery environment, or if you're an independent artist and you're doing your own shows, or you're collaborating and doing things in restaurants or whatever, it's all relevant, you know? As long as you put it out there and allow people to engage with what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah. But you gotta stand for something, you know?
Makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense.
Let the
yeah.
art sell itself. Sometimes it does.
Very true. You have a logo.
Yes.
When did you create that? Why did you create that? And where can we find your logo?
This logo is the Paint Man Drips. That's what this is. And I created this in 2014. I did a series of works called The Father Project. And this was something that I created to basically kind of bring some sort of conversation to the topic of fatherhood in general. And I talked with over 100 individuals, men and women, about their experiences with fatherhood. Not as a child, but as a father or a single mother or whatever, just to get the different perspectives. And I used each one of those conversations to create an abstract thought inspired by someone else's experience. And I did a series of these silhouettes of myself with abstract formation in the middle, in it.
Seen those.
Right. And it was, I guess, throughout the exhibit, seeing how people gravitated to those images, I realized that I kind of came up with something really special. And I was like, that's a branding thing right there, you know? Nobody really looked at that like, oh, that's you, right? And I'm like, yeah, because this is essentially my contribution to the Father Project and my expression. But as time went on, I kind of just perfected the image, dripped the paint from the image, and allowed it to become this symbol for a creative spirit that lies within all of us, right? So it was a great way for me to also sign my paintings, right? Stamp my paintings, and kind of lead people down this road of creativity with this image. So whenever you see this, you know something worthwhile is coming, right? And t-shirts, you put it on t-shirts, and you never underestimate the power of t-shirts.
Exactly.
You don't have to be a fashion designer. You don't have to have a sewing machine and sew and do all of these great things to make you feel like you're this, that. A t-shirt with the image that inspires people and has a positive meaning can go a long way, right?
A hoodie,
Absolutely.
a hat.
And then it
Exactly.
expands and expands because the demand is there,
Right.
you know? And every time we produce some, they sell out and we produce more. But I always do a different color or a limited something so people really have something that is limited and special. And if it ever grows bigger than that, then we'll have those conversations later.
Yeah.
But it's really just a extension of the artistic spirit that lives in all of us. So people love this all over, you know.
So the logo and also your tags, Art by J. Taylor, and do you have another one?
Art by J. Taylor is the
main
tag.
one.
That's
So
right.
that's important for people to remember.
Everything.
These things sell online too. Of course, all of your work does.
Yes, they sell online. You can go to my website, artbyjtaylor.com. Whenever the apparel and the merchandise is available, there's always a tab there and a link to get you to anything that you want to get. It doesn't last very long,
Yeah.
but you know, it's great. It's great when someone wants one. You see an order come in every time. It's like, oh, somebody wants a hoodie. Or somebody wants a T-shirt.
And you sold some during the opening.
Yeah, and
That
it's
was
always great to have. And,
Yeah.
and I know how I feel when I go and experience artists in their works and things. I always want to pick up something.
Yeah.
If it's not a painting, then maybe it's their T-shirt, or you know, I would love to be a walking billboard for them. You know, especially when it deals with something creative. You know,
Something
absolutely.
that you admire and appreciate.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. You just kind of allow the possibility to be there and see what happens, you know? We can't control every aspect of everything, but if you
Yeah.
can try to future what it could be, you know, just project yourself into the future and see what could be, you know? You can always say, oh, I thought that could happen, you know? Or yeah, the possibilities are endless. You know?
That is an amazing way to end this.
Yeah.
I think it's fantastic.
Thank you
you
so
much
much
for the interview.
Thank
Really
you for
appreciate
having
it.
me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.